to Left Coast Writers, and to those of you who are new to Book Passage, thanks for supporting independent bookstores like this one. If you have a cell phone, you can check that and make sure it's on silent or turned off.
Whoops, I gotta do that with mine.
The author will now do the same thing. And where's your husband? Yeah, he's checking it too. Okay, that's good. If you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of Christina's book and would like to do so in about an hour or so after some presentation and Q&A, the books are available at all the registers behind you, and you'll be able to pick up one. Once you pay for it, bring it on back in here. We'll be moving this table over, and our guests will be signing at that table. Tonight is a hybrid. It's a photography book and it's a poetry book, and you're about to see and hear both the photography and the poetry, and they're both beautiful. This is a sort of a unique kind of book that our guest and your friend has done tonight. I'm going to just read a little quote from her. Every poem in this book evolves from a deep meditation with the image, and every image becomes a resonant backdrop that sends the poem flying, sometimes flying into unknown territory. That's what you're up against tonight. Well, and by the way, I forgot before I go on and do our bio of our friend, I have to acknowledge our fearless leader, the artist formerly known as Linda Watanabe McFerrin, ladies and gentlemen, who is back in the back row. I'll keep doing this until you do intros. You do intros, I won't do this anymore.
Thank you, Dana.
Here you are. Our guest is Cristina Olsen. She was born and raised in Argentina. Her mom is here tonight. She continued her education up through the doctoral level in the US. For 20 years, she was a global nomad, bouncing around between South America and the United States, and vagabonding through various countries until she settled down in Marin County, California. She has been a translator, a language teacher, a lecturer on world religions, and a fundraiser for environmental programs, and tonight, she's an author. Would you please welcome your friend and ours, Cristina Olsen.
Okay. Wow, thank you for coming. I was sort of dreaming that there wouldn't be anybody here, and I'd be speaking to ghosts and spirits, which is fine. So I'm just going to launch talk a little bit about what poetry and photography means to me and how they're connected. But then I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story through poetry, prose poetry, and photography. So, I personally don't think that my poems are difficult. They're not abstract. In fact, they are narrative and lyrical and sometimes musical. They tell a story. As it says in the back cover, if you haven't seen this, it is actually, I think I wrote here, an autobiography of the soul. And that starts in post-war London, where my parents moved to when I was but a little baby. And then to the vast pampas of Argentina, from Buenos Aires to the hills of Novato. As a poet, and some of you poets may kind of cringe when I say this, I don't think I play with words. I think I paint with words. I have sort of discovered myself as a poet recently. I used to write poetry early on in my life and then stopped, and then it just all happened again. And I realized that there was a kind of a real visual component to my poetry. So, and now I'm not a painter, but I am a photographer, so what better medium than photography to illustrate the poetry? For me, photography and poetry both have a way of immortalizing the present moment, a present moment that is always passing. And they make present and immortalize things we ordinarily don't notice, things that are so fleeting that they escape our conscious awareness. So for me, taking photographs is a powerful form of meditation. With camera in hand, my mind is stilled and I become acutely aware of what surrounds me. So I have been an amateur, by the way, photographer since the pre-digital era. So that makes me a dinosaur, using my digital camera like a manual camera. I stalk my subjects, I hunt them, I hover over them in different positions, waiting to prance on just that right moment, the right lighting, the right way of me being, and so forth. What my camera captures attunes me to poetry. Immortalized in a frame, I can now hover at leisure over images, allowing what I see to feed my words. So really it is photography that inspires my poetry. Now here's a photo that I took in Hawaii, the island of Kauai, visiting a very good friend of mine, Elizabeth, sitting right there. And this photograph inspired the poem that then inspired the title of my book, Kissing the Sky. It's called simply Poetry. Words of poetry, along meandering streams, seep into marshy loam, or melt like chocolate bars in the light of heaven's dome. Words well worn stop making sense, then spring anew, each morn reborn in present tense, then laid to rest each even song. Leaping across bouquets of hovering clouds, grasping scorching sun rays, poetry lifts me up above the crowds, towing me along the blue way. Up I go till I kiss the sky with outstretched hand, scattering words up high, then streaming down to the land like raindrops to beautify. The book is organized into 3 parts that trace 3 evolutionary stages of my soul's journey. So now let me take you on that journey that begins with part 1, lighting up the night. And it all starts in London. When I was a wee little one, and this is about my father. Solar wind, stirring out of the dark, I wailed alone in the night, when in he rushed, a solar wind, flooding the room with light, lifting me up and holding me tight. He was my father. For just a few years, a wind-swept ray from the spheres. Twirling from room to room, our laughter bubbled with heat from pools of broiling glee, following the jazzy beat thumping out of the 78. Or we pounded the piano keys, hollering long-forgotten ditties to the war ghosts left behind, rustling the sagging blinds in the crumbling London flat. Ralph was his name, a jazzy name, a big fluffy dog name. Then he was gone, so soon, forever stuck in that gloom between the night and day of his alcohol days, glass in hand, half full. My first heartbreak, solar wind across the night sky, I will let you go now. I think this photograph expresses so powerfully that chiaroscuro, the light and the dark of life. Hovering over the dark swells of the lake, there is always light. And even at the bottom of the wine glass, a sun immersed in blood red of pain peeks over the mountains. The journey then takes me to the Pampas. So after London, we go back to Argentina, to my grandparents' farmstead. This photo I took in January of 2009. And it is summer in January in the Southern Hemisphere. And this was the hottest heat wave Argentina had ever experienced. In fact, a lot of animals, farm animals, cattle and sheep were just dying from lack of water and heat. You can see the sheep here do look rather bedraggled, and I always wonder why on earth my cousin, who now runs the farm, decided to invest in sheep when this is actually cattle country. So this is a prose poem, and it echoes somewhat the first poem. Vortex of light. As a child, I roamed the pampas of Argentina, a flat, shadowless land that dips into an endless horizon under the merciless canopy of the sky, where the sun glows incandescent, fanned by the pearled green of sprouting wheat, soon to be transformed into carpets of gold, then paving the way for the final blaze, scorching the earth to ashen brown. On that flat expanse of land, light oversees all the props of the field. Fence posts, birds, windmills, and barns, gauchos herding cattle and sheep, all surfaces awash with a light that masks the deeper and darker core of things. Returning to my childhood haunts, the limitless expanse lies bare before my feet, stretched out towards that distance where land and sky kiss, where touch is more real than sight, the breeze a loving caress on the cheek, the wind a passionate embrace from an invisible deity. Now, in the prime of my life, I see the light-filled pampa as but the lustrous veil of something deeper. I close my eyes. The breeze fans my skin. Beyond the far horizon, a solar wind speeds towards me. Fearless, I will breathe in deeply that wind that is the deep vortex of all lights. Change of pace. As things progress in this evolutionary journey, and still in part one, I come to experience an understanding that sorrow and joy are intimately linked. To experience one, you must also experience the other. This photograph is taken at Filoli Gardens, if you know where that is, about an hour and a half from here. And she really caught my eye. Dahlia in the light, you caught my eye, all ablaze in the rays above. Part of you all dazed, a tear shedding from deep within where no one sees. But I see and marvel how one teardrop can yet ignite 1,000 joys, and each petal a strand of light, a candle to my night. Burn me bright in the fiery bliss of your short life. Raise me up with each breath of your blazing sigh, my song of thee ignite. You can see a little influence of maybe romantic 19th century poetry with the thee, the thee. So, now we come to part 2, leaning on love. By the way, there are many more poems to each section. I'm just giving you the highlights. I learn about the power of love to lift you even higher. Here I have 2 poems and a prose poem about love of ancestors, and you'll see why, love of ancestors, love of dog, and love of man, or is it men, or is it a man? So I'm an avid ancestry researcher and have discovered one bloodline that reaches back to 1450s. Finding out who my ancestors were has anchored me solidly in who I am. And that is the gift of the ancestors. And I highly recommend, if you can, to try and research your ancestors, because it really enlarges you. Somehow, my ancestry has a lot to do with cows, too. I love cows. They're so cozy and warm. And whenever I see cows in a field, it not only takes me back to the Pampas, but it takes me back to some very ancient ancestral memory of hunters and farmers and bards. Excuse me, I need to. Ancestral boars and bovines. Back in the forest clearing of Herefordshire, good old Thomas farmed and herded cattle. There he stands, crowning the genealogical tree in the year of our Lord, 1453. Further back in time, so says the bard, wild Hyrcanas roamed the mountains, spearing boars, eluding Saxons, abducting Viking lasses with tresses flaxen. Edric of Picton flummoxed the conquering Norns. They called these rag bands the Sylvan Swarms, for they slept nose to sky, come what may, you know, to tighten up the soft spots for the fray. Sounds familiar. Such crazy notions sometimes fill my mind. To herd cattle along the mountain face, seek solace in a bovine gaze, or hurl through the forest on the chase, boar all ablaze, cow left behind in a daze. Such are the churnings of rumpus ancestry in the thumping blood of yours truly here, in this year of our lady bard and seer, in this span of 2,000 and score more years. So this wild streak in me that I inherited from my ancestors, I continue to explore in this next poem about my love for dog. She was half coyote and half shepherd. Coyote friend, I hear you barking from fields beyond, see you bounding up the slope ahead. My pulse quickens to be with you again. Wild and winsome in our youth, we ran the hills abreast, yet I still surge on the quest. You came to me a whimpering pup, then made me laugh with your swagger. You grew into a swift tracker, spanning that liminal space between the wild and the civilized. Together we fled the lowland strife, found respite on the oaken slopes. When you bounded after deer, inside my ribcage I beat the drum until you were all done. Together in that liminal divide of the civilized and the wild, you taught me with your eyes what no human ever taught with the babble of their tongue. That the chase alone is reason for living, not the catch, but the joy of keeping in sight the quivering haunches in flight. So talking about hunting, my husband, Dave, also known as Haiku Dave, also a poet and photographer, is part Apache and many other things. He came into my life a few months after I lost Coyote friend. Some might say he was a rebound relationship. However, we have been a good solid 24 years together. Yay. This is a prose poem on seeing the invisible. Standing above the fog, he surveys the unseen, memories rising up from times past, faint drumbeats bearing messages from uncounted and discounted ancestors. Apache, Tolteca, Maya, Moro, all dancing in his blood, sounding the drumbeat ever louder, up through the fog, up through the soles of his feet. He wears white to honor the day of the sun, the day when all stand still, infusing a drop of white to stem the darkening of the sky before all memory is gone. But he remembers. He readies for the hunt. He crouches, his eyes sharp as the eagle's. He sees what no one else sees, an image from a fog-robed world filling his lens. Hand steady at the base, finger poised to release the shudder. The drums cease. The world stops spinning. Silence and suspension are one. I look across the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of his prey, but already the whirl of the shudder signals capture. He turns to me, triumphant, and says, "Look, I got it." I look to see what I could not see before. Looking back at me, my hidden self revealed. So now we come to where I actually get to kiss the sky. In part 3, the mood of these poems are sensuous and spiritual, or spiritually sensuous, or sensuously spiritual. In any case, the pathway to the sky is through the senses. This photo I took in the town of Grion, Canton Vaud in Switzerland in 2013. Skyborne umbrellas. Senses soothed by sibilant tones, hummingbirds hovering with ease, and breezes through the leaves. Bees and bumblebees too, liquid feast to sky-borne ears, blotting and easing all fears. Eyes shut, I marvel at the hum invading all my senses. The land below wafting up incense. In this billowing ascent, sky-borne umbrellas cup the rising song a cappella. It is good to be above the din, where the air is redolent with fragrant sentiment. Far below all hustles and bustles, but here above the hurling abyss, all that matters is unadorned bliss. Now, before I totally disappear into the sky, you should know that one of my primary influences in poetry is the 16th century Spanish mystic John of the Cross, Juan de la Cruz. He was known as the father of the church in Spain, a title that very few people have. Father of the church in the Vatican, actually everywhere. But he was pretty radical, actually. When you really read him, you're going, wow, did they read him? He coined the term dark night of the soul, dark night of the spirit, terms popular in some branches of psychology. This next poem expresses a sense of the dark night as an actual welcoming path that leads to seeing everything reflected in everything else. I wish they would turn down the air conditioner. You know, that air just gets to me. Okay. Delicious not to think. Delicious not to think. Waves of silence washing over, preparing the ground for a thought surpassing all the foolish prattling. I trudge up the hill, tasting dew at every step. Dark the night, but I know the path so well. Starlit sky, beacon to my stilled mind. Delicious not to think, when the moon is at rest, stars abloom in liquid sky, lotuses dipping down over the brimming ground. Now for the very last one. This poem is directly influenced by a poem of Juan de la Cruz. It's a phrase that he uses. He says, "My beloved, silent music, sounding solitude." And here is my response or echo. Stillness is not silence. When silence descends, I sink into the sound of stillness, the symphony of all symphonies, the universal hum, God's voice holding me aloft. Can you hear it? Behind chatter, behind thought, along that deep highway from the seat of your being to the height of your longing, from lotus to crown, ladder to heaven, feeding your blood from toenails to hair tips. Can you hear it? The sonorous trace of a harp string, the soothing sibilance of a singing reed, the long wail of the cold train sax, still reverberating in his passing. Birds hold the fullness of it, fly with it, mate with it, until their chests bell forth their coda to the waiting God. Stillness is not silence. It is the hum of life, surging through you in the song of you, God's ears thrilling with you, swaying with you in the forest clearing. Thank you. I do have some more photos that I can do a quick little run through.
Okay.
Just quick, like
Sure.
not all the photos, just a few more.
How about of your dog?
No, I see all these are contemporary photos that I took. Any photo that I had, like say of my dog, it wasn't even me.
Seems it's across the way.
That's it. Okay. I guess we have questions
Yes.
and answers.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You want to take a break? Have some wine, maybe come up with some questions.
So Christina, I really loved your presentation. I thought it was just, you present your poems so beautifully. Do you have any training in presentation or acting?
I studied acting in high school and early college days. I really wanted to be a film star. But you know what? I didn't have the courage back then. It was too frightening. Now that I'm really old, I'm ready to go on stage.
Nicely done.
Very, very sensual visually and audibly, very beautifully done.
Thank you.
When did you start writing, Christina?
Well, this particular collection I started about 6 years ago, and it came really suddenly. I mean, I just sort of one morning woke up and there was a poem in my head, and then they just came streaming, you know, day after day after day. But I have been writing poetry on and off for a while, but since I was a child. Yeah. Yes.
Who are some of your favorite poets that you like to read?
Mary Oliver, Jane Hirschfield, Yeats, Longfellow, all the Keating, all the romantic poets. I mean, you get that I'm sort of a romantic.
Yeah.
Then make sure it wasn't accidental.
It's funny, I was wondering before coming tonight if having the visual was going to distract me from the words or vice versa.
Right.
Because normally when I read poetry or hear poetry, I sort of invent my own visual, if you will. This was this fantastic, I mean, it was kind of, it was interesting because it was very fluid for me and very heart-opening, very deep. But at the same time, this wonderful kind of dual experience. You know, I kept kind of getting this feeling of the two being woven together, and it was magical.
Thank you for sharing that, because I have struggled with that. I mean, the poetry, the photography and the poetry came together, but then for a long time I thought, God, you know, should it just be poetry? Should I just leave the, you know, and I went back and forth and back and forth, and then, okay.
It's
Thank you.
fantastic.
So it's good to hear.
It was a great dance. Thank you.
You know, Cristina, your intro to the book and the framing that you did for the photography and the poetry was really powerful,
Huh.
and it helped integrate me as a participant to understand and experience what she just described.
Huh.
Is that in your book?
Oh, are you talking about what
Your intro?
what Dana read?
No,
Oh.
no, your intro.
Your intro.
What you said.
Oh, no. It isn't. I mean, something of that is in the book.
But
I do talk in
the intro, because for me with poetry, it is so personal that how an author chooses to frame their work,
Yeah.
to give the reader a reference point to understand the perspective,
Right.
is really critical.
Yes.
To really appreciate and the work and the efforts and the artistic endeavor.
Yes.
That-
So there is, of course, in the book, I do talk about the interplay of photography and poetry, but not precisely in these words.
Because that was really personal.
Yeah.
And that's the link for me to really go with you on that journey.
Great.
But that's why I was wondering, because your intro was excellent.
And to think that I just made it up yesterday.
Yeah, but it took how many? At least 6 years for it to come up overnight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if this question is going to go anywhere, but what's the difference between writing about the thing that you saw and writing about the photo of the thing that you saw?
Wow. Writing about the thing itself, and then writing about the photo. Well, you know, I have to say that some of the poems in the book come when I'm walking, hiking, and I see something and it strikes me. But what happens is, I have my camera and then my iPhone, and I have one hand my camera and then the recorder and the iPhone, and they're composing my soul. They happen together. So yeah. But it's the wonderful thing about the photograph is I can then bring it home and really meditate on it. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, what have you learned as a result of this experience?
Now, are you talking about the experience of publishing this book or writing and all that?
The whole event, what really stands out for you as a new learning? Or a deeper
I am
learning?
such a different person now than I was 6 years ago. I could probably tell you this. 6 years ago, I took early retirement, and I trained to be a life coach. But the training was extraordinary, and it ripped me open. And that's how this wave of poetry came about. And the witnessing, I mean, my being able to witness this in myself was extraordinarily powerful. You know, again, 6 years ago, more than 6 years ago, if I was standing up here, I'd be a nervous wreck. So something really changed. So I love being up here.
Okay.
Let's drink.